Hello and welcome to today's HDI webinar. We're very glad you've joined us for Beyond ITSM, leveraging service management to deliver value across your entire organization. I'm Tim McElgan. I'm the editorial manager and principal analyst at HDI, and I'll be your host for today's session. A few housekeeping announcements before we get started. If you have any technical difficulties during today's session, simply hit F5 or Command R to refresh your browser window. That will usually take care of the problem. If you do have any additional issues, just hit the yellow help icon beside the slides, and somebody will be right with you. We encourage you to ask questions at any time during the discussion. To do that, just type your question into the Q&A window on the side of your screen and hit submit. Due to time constraints, we will only be able to answer a limited number of questions today, but if possible, we will get back to you with an answer after the session. Today's presentation will be available on demand shortly after the completion of this live event. You'll receive an email reminder once it becomes available. And finally, thank you very much to Freshworks for sponsoring today's session. With that, let's meet today's panelists. Roy Atkinson is CEO of business advisory practice Clifton Butterfield, LLC. He was described on CIO Insight as a model for the future digital leader, and by Nextiva as one of the top 50 customer service experts of the decade. His guidance continues to shape how organizations approach and achieve true digital transformation, and he's been recognized among many other honors with an HDI Lifetime Achievement Award. Thank you, Roy, for joining us.
My pleasure.
Valence Howden is I'll leave room for you. Sorry about that. Valence Howden is a principal analyst at Infotech Research Group with more than 30 years of experience in IT, focusing on the areas of service management, enterprise and IT governance, strategy development and execution, risk management, metrics, and process design. Valence is a frequent and very valued speaker at HDI Support World and Service Management World, conferences among many other venues where he shares his insights and experiences. Good to see you again, Valence.
Thanks. Nice to see you too, Tim.
And finally, Ken Gonzalez, known by many as Ken Gon, sounds like a Star Wars character, is a seasoned technology professional and internationally recognized expert in IT service management. Before joining Freshworks, Ken was a Gartner analyst, working with executives, technology leaders, and their teams to develop innovative solutions to business and competitive issues. Throughout his career, Ken has taken a people-centric, value-based, and results-focused approach to understanding and addressing his clients' most pressing challenges. Ken, very nice to meet you, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Tim. I am not the analyst you were looking for.
Nor am I any longer. So just to kind of set the stage here, over the last several months, our conversations with service management practitioners and thought leaders has made it clear that service management teams can no longer simply react to shifts in what businesses and suppliers and partners and customers are asking of service management. In this rapidly changing business environment, service organizations have to understand and stay ahead of those shifts. And that requires hard thinking about talent, about tools, metrics, methodologies, processes, and frameworks that's going to be used that your teams will use to deliver those services over the next few years. So let's look first at talent. Internal and external competition for tech talent has intensified and has big implications for hiring, for training, for retention strategies, as well as for where we're going to invest in automation and outsourcing and other partnerships, and for that matter, workforce management tools. So I'm going to start with Roy, followed by Valence, and then Ken. What do you see at this point as the critical workforce impacts of adopting service management practices and methodologies, specifically outside of IT?
A couple of interesting things, and HDI has done quite a bit of research, a couple of studies on enterprise service management in general. And one of the things that HDI found was that whopping 75% of respondent organizations said that productivity had gone up. And in over half, employee satisfaction had increased. Those are two very positive impacts regarding the workforce. It makes sense because there's more uniformity across the organization in the interactions with the tools or tools being used. People know what to expect. And whether they're working with HR, IT, finance, or another line of business, there are similarities in how the interface appears and how it works. So instead of being presented with a different tool for each line of business, there's some more uniformity. And one also hopes that as enterprise service management takes hold, there's been some training and education about what to expect. Another interesting thing that surfaced in that research and that I've seen as well is that 2/3 of respondents said that their support organizations are now providing additional IT services. More than half said they're supporting a broader scope of customers. In every case, the support organization has taken on more responsibility. And for example, the percentage providing additional non-IT services has more than tripled. So that as enterprise service management rolls out, support people are taking on supporting various aspects of the business, not just IT. And that changes the workload, changes the focus, and requires a different set of skills.
Yeah, I think that brings up another important point, is that users are not really interested in you telling them that's not my job. They expect to be able to go to an interface, to a platform, to an internal website, whatever it happens to be, and know how to actually use that. Valence, what do you see as some of the critical workforce impacts of ESM?
I think it really drives, one, the importance of the experience, both especially at the employee level, across the entire organization. I think we lose a lot when we don't understand that, and I don't know if it's just the ESM aspect of it or just a change in the thinking in the organization, but the whole idea that value provision through my teams is going to be different. We're in much more of a hybrid working structure than we used to be. So the experience, both from support and in terms of how we deliver the service value, we have to look at those chains of value very differently. It's going to engage a lot of different teams. We have to extend the thinking around it much more than just, there's always been that focus on the workflow. We've changed the workflow. Sometimes it's reinventing the way we deliver the value through the teams and across the entire organization. So for me, it's the ESM movement of service to we as an organization deliver value through services in this way, because I think that changes the composition of teams, how involved people are, and the level of understanding everyone has to have in terms of where they fit in the provision of value in a new landscape with more digital services, more digital working styles. And location has an impact on things like where the data moves, the levels of risk you see. So you have to look at a lot of different elements around provision and execution of service, and those are things that you have to account for too.
Right, and then that obviously impacts the IT team very, very strongly, in addition to changing the way that other departments do their work. And you brought up experience. That's going to be an interesting discussion, I think, this year. We're at HDI, we're going to kind of take a look and say, how much of this is hype and buzzword, and how much of it is organizations really embracing the idea of experience management. Ken, what do you see as critical workforce management, workforce impacts rather of service management? I know you're in the trenches every day with clients on this. What are you seeing?
Absolutely, Tim. So the first thing I'll say is that it's really interesting because you can't just rely on technical elements or products to be able to address the issue. I think that we need to start being able to develop some competency and chops around cultural and organizational change management. If we don't do that, we run the risk of actually just relying on, well, the product installed properly, why are we not getting the benefit? The second is really cultivating cross-functional thinking so that we're able to listen to what our business consumers need and be able to think about it from what's my part of what we're trying to help deliver, as opposed to, well, hey, look, I just needed to do some storage and that worked. So what's your problem? Actually, if the person doesn't get what they need, it becomes all of our problem. And bringing that together, using that cross-functional thinking is really an important part of it. The last thing I'll say is that we want to go beyond traditional training and now start targeting the simultaneous development of knowledge, skills, and abilities. Because we want our personnel to be able to actually grow into new roles and develop new competencies that they can actually use to ensure that our business consumers are getting the things that they need in order to fulfill their mission essential tasks. Because if we don't do that, well, why are we doing what we're doing?
I think that highlights a need to focus on the service piece rather than the management piece, right? So, how are we being of service to the entire organization. So there's talent. Let's take a look now at tools, and it's clear AI and automation tools have enabled a hybrid workforce. And service management leaders need to figure out what does that mean for service delivery and for service management. But it extends, I think, beyond leadership. Everyone in IT needs to think deeply about how hybrid teams impact how they deliver services, how they do their jobs, et cetera. For example, everyone in service management needs to understand the skills that are needed to work in and, I think, very critically manage these hybrid teams. Ken, can you share your views on what are some of the most important skills what are some of the skills that are becoming more and more important, I guess is how I do it.
Sure, I'd be happy to. The first one, marketing. Why marketing? Because traditionally IT stinks at it. We have to be able to create and serve a need. And in that way, if we're not actually making it available to people and hey, we can do this for you, they're not going to know. So we have to find a way of being able to do that. And that requires actually a lot of work to develop it. The second is demand management and forecasting. Because if you're actually going to build something, well, are we building the right thing? How much of it do we expect somebody's going to consume? And are we provisioning enough resource in order to be able to ensure that we can actually meet the forecast demand? So that's a second competency. The next thing is around product management. Now, product management, what does product management have to do? Well, products and services exist on a continuum. And it's very rare to find that you're either all product or all service. So using product management, which is where service management writ large is derived from, it gives us the opportunity to approach how we're both managing the provision as well as the consumption of the thing that the customer cares about in a way that allows us to apply some structure and get very granular about what we're doing, which goes to my fourth point, which is really around financial management. We can't consider finance as being one size fits all. Anything that you deliver to a customer, we need to be concerned about the cost, quality, and performance parameters so that we're meeting the need, not exceeding it or falling short in some circumstances.
Right, that really speaks to understanding the entire business and where the value points are. Roy, what do you see at this point as the most critical areas in terms of near-term and longer-term training to develop and evolve the skills that are going to be needed?
I think I'm going to say something that's in a slightly different direction. And in addition to what Ken was saying, if you think about marketing in large is communication. It's saying, here's the things that we are willing to give you. Here's what we want to support you in. I'm going to get a little bit more specific. I'm going to say when we're collaborating with hybrid team members, we're doing most of our work in writing of one form or another, whether that's instant messaging or it's planning documents or it's real-time problem solving. So writing and language comprehension skills are essential. And in addition to that, team members also have to be aware of the size and composition of the team so that they're not forgetting that people are working from different locations. If you know, it's one thing to be in a room full of other people doing your job. It's another thing to have people doing your job who are scattered across a time zone or across a continent. And just to be mindful of the entire team and how important that communication is across however big that team is and however it's distributed. So those are two things. Language and communication are top of my list.
Yeah, that's great. And Valence, I'm curious, is that training happening? Do you see it happening? I know you work with a lot of clients across a lot of different industries, and if it's not happening, I mean, why isn't it? And what should leadership be focused on there?
I would say, and it is improving, but I say I see a lot of discussion about the training that's required. What I don't see is a lot of continuous action on the training, building up those skills internally within organizations. And I mean, there are definitely reasons for it, because both Ken and Roy raised some good points. We got to be able to market and communicate the things we do, but you still find people don't fully know what they do. It's very hard to market something you don't fully understand. or hasn't been defined end to end. And so a lot of the challenge IT has is it's really still not focused on the value provision at the end. We're still very siloed in the work we do, the activities we focus on. So it becomes a much harder lift to start building out the skills we need for, looking at service management as a broad capability. You see people struggle with knowledge of what they provide, demand into portfolio. What's the value of the things we have? So there's a lot of areas where the skill sets that we need to develop aren't there because the organization isn't ready. And I've seen some of the surveys that HDI and others have done, and just talking about the adoption of some of the higher order service management capabilities and how limited that is. If we're still stuck dealing with incidents and changes, we're really not really looking at end-to-end vision of value and results that we generate through these practices. So I think a lot of it is the positioning, which has affected what we train and where we focus. So for leadership, I think part of it is just starting to look at things from, and we always talk about the outside in, understand the value and the experience of the consumer or the customer that we have, but really bringing that end-to-end knowledge into the organization so people understand where they fit and what skills are required to get people there. Some skills are specific to the service management practice. Some are OCM. Some are just, we need a better understanding of things. So how do we bring that knowledge to bear for the organization?
Yeah, and I think it gets very interesting as we do. We'll see what happens with the Great Resignation, et cetera. But as knowledge leaves the organization, how do we preserve that and share that when people aren't sort of walking up next to each other and having a coffee in the break room? So that's going to be, I think, in terms of the communication and collaboration piece, that's a really important consideration for leadership to take a close look at. And I was going to speak to Roy's point earlier about communication and collaboration. The British seem to be very good at putting on television examples of how not to do IT service. So first it was the IT crowd, which was, have you tried plugging it in or turning it off and turning it on again? And now I'm watching a show called Slow Horses, which is a BBC show on one of the streaming platforms. And it's about an MI5 kind of group that is shunted aside, but their tech guy is everything you don't want in a technology workforce. So if you're looking for examples of what not to do, I highly recommend Slow Horses. So Val, so staying with you on this one, where do you advise businesses to look for service management transformation opportunities over, let's say, the next 12, 18 months?
I'm never sure I'm really asking them to look at service management transformation in and of itself. I think that's probably a factor of organizational transformation and what the organization needs. Primarily because I think, and I'm hopeful, that what we're going to get to is that application of service management as a capability of an organization and not just as a set of practices. So we offer services, we have a practice and capabilities to do that effectively, because that opens the door to looking at it in a transformational way. In a lot of cases, we've been really rigid on the execution of some of it. So the thinking has to change. It's not IT service management. It's not even just service management. It's the way my organization produces value through services. And then I can look at how I transform those practices to best suit the customer base, the needs we have, the new technology that's available, but I have a lens of it across services, and that will affect the practices. And it'll do it in a way that's really beneficial for the organization. So if we stop trying to extend the capability and start looking at it as something we do, it opens the space and breadth to allow you to innovate in a lot of different ways. So I wouldn't target one specific thing. I would create the breadth and the learning that allows us to innovate across the board.
That's great. And keeping in mind what Val has just shared, Ken, where are your client teams focusing as you're assisting those clients with their ESM efforts and planning? Looks like you're muted there, Ken.
Sorry about that. I was coughing and I wanted to keep it off of the air.
It's usually me.
As folks are transitioning from focusing on traditional ITSM to enterprise service management, one of the key elements is actually going from, hey, we're thinking about internal considerations to those people that we're working with and making things available to them. And because we're changing that focus to be more what I would define as client-centric, The three dimensions that we want to pay attention to are, number one, are we providing the right level of experience to meet the need? Are they actually satisfied with the things that we provide? And does it drive sufficient value to justify our efforts and the spend to go along with doing it? And this is actually really good news, because instead of trying to think of it as a large initiative, we can actually start working on transforming the enterprise one experience at a time. Something that's actually granular and gives us the opportunity to make our customers' lives better in a way that's visible, undeniable, and actually drives value. So that could be as simple as getting good at commonly performed requested things, request management, and using the kind of metrics that would indicate to the customer that, hey, we're actually getting what we need in the timing or the quality or quantity that we actually need in order to be able to be successful. And then finally, the thing that goes along with it is being able to get a mix of metrics, both from provider side as well as from the consumer side, to help us actually engage in continuous improvement without risking failure of delivery for the client. So we might optimize a process, but what's the effect on the person that consumes this? Are we actually decreasing the benefit that they get from the work that we're doing? If we build a good set of metrics that's really whole in nature, I think we run the potential for benefit there is doing better without actually impacting the customer negatively.
Yeah, and that's the question of metrics and what we should be measuring and why, obviously, is an entire conversation all by itself. Roy, I know that you think and talk about digital transformation all the time, and you're working with clients on this. Where can the folks in our audience today find some near-term, or where can they look for some near-term opportunities when they're thinking about extending service management beyond IT?
I think that we have to remember that one of the goals of enterprise service management is to try to develop more inclusive data. It really always winds up being about data, and to eliminate silos and create as much as possible a single source of truth for the organization, so that you've got a larger pool of data, gives you a better 360-degree view of what's going on, and some commonality as to how you use the data and pull it out with the tools at hand. So one of the places to look is close by. Who are the people that you work with most closely? And for IT, in a lot of cases, that's HR. HR and IT, for example, very often cooperate extremely closely in cases like onboarding. HR hires somebody, they immediately notify IT, IT creates accounts, they source equipment, they do all those things. In a lot of cases, a lot of it's automated. So that's a good place to start. And then as you can look around the organization, you'll find other spots where you touch various parts of the organization. So start where you are. I love that from ITIL 4. Start where you are. It's a great guiding principle. And look around and see who's close and who is working with you in any event, and then try to find some commonalities in the way that you can do things and use the tools that you have to enable new capabilities and new ways of doing those tasks.
Yeah, it's interesting because I noted in one of our recent surveys on the state of service management that HR was not, sort of as close to the top in terms of business areas that are applying service management principles. And somebody made the point that, well, the onboarding and the offboarding, there's a clear, as you were just pointing out, there's that clear kind of symbiosis between HR and IT. But, in the sort of day-to-day stuff, whether that's performance review or performance improvement plans and that sort of thing, not as easily sort of, what's the word I'm looking for, standardized and turned into a process that IT can then automate for you. So there, I think that's an important thing to think about. You don't dive in and try to do everything that one of your other departments does. but rather you look carefully at what it is that they're truly trying to accomplish, and where can you apply service management initially.
I think if I can interject there for a second, it's one of the dangers in a lot of the approaches that have been taken to ESM is that IT has been driving it, and there's a danger there that you're going into other areas of the organization, and it feels to them like IT is telling me how to do my job. And that's kind of a danger zone, and you might actually wind up being counterproductive because you'll have that resistance to change, and you don't want to do that. You want to have it cooperatively worked through the organization, kind of like working bread dough.
Yeah, no, that's great, and I want to share this is not a question from our audience, but a comment to Ken. Nancy Robinson says she loves that providing experiences that really make things better has to be a key and central goal for service management. So we're running a little fast today. I don't know if I should have interjected more or slowed down my delivery, but I know we still have a lot to say on the topic. So I also know that our audience is going to be leaving this session with a whole lot to think about. But let's look down the road a little ways. Let's put on our turbans and grab our crystal balls. Start with you, Roy. What are you excited about in terms of the tools and processes that IT teams can leverage now and shortly to achieve solid near-term returns from service management?
Well, I think that the emerging technologies that are happening really started to take off. If you look at applications like AI that can be utilized, that underlie a lot of the tools that we're using now already, and are increasing in capability and can be used across the entire organization. You can have decently powered bots, for example, giving information and pointing to knowledge across the organization, regardless of the line of business, regardless of the department. That's just one example. Knowledge sharing is really one of those keys, and it goes back to what I was saying before about communication and language. Sharing knowledge across the organization is huge, and that's an area where technology can really help out. And also, I think that data analysis has really come to the forefront. And as I said before, data is really at the heart of all this stuff. You really want to be able to get a good view of how the organization is working and where the trouble spots might be, what's causing people pain, where's the experience not good. That's data. All of that is data. And the more attention you can pay to that and the more analysis that you can get from that data, then the better off you're going to be in both the short and long term. Yeah,
and we are collecting just these unthinkably huge masses of data, right? The tools that Ken and his team are helping our audience deploy. Those are data-driven, data-gathering tools, and the difficulty is then how do we get into that dark data? How do we actually, get a hold of the insights that are actually hidden in there? And I think that is probably the great challenge for the next little while in service management. Is how do we get in and use that data? Valence, any emerging service management capabilities that our audience should be thinking about?
Maybe layering off of what Roy was saying, the idea of if we have good, clean data and we understand how we can use it, just things like intelligent automation, which has so many applications, even in the short term in terms of optimizing the reliability of work, optimizing and adding consistency to experience, but the broader term aspect of adding predictive analytics and predictive capabilities based on the knowledge and information that we have. As Roy's mentioning, I can search from everywhere. It allows me to take the expertise, the information, and turn it into predictive elements of here's what we might see, here's how we can handle things. It gets us ahead of the game a little bit. And to sort of tie back to a point that was made as well, it allows us to use the expertise of the business across a lot of different domains. the flaw that always came out of extending ITSM from IT elsewhere was it operated off the assumption that we were the best at executing workflow. How everyone else has workflows they run, they have knowledge of what they do. So the idea isn't we're extending our knowledge to you, it's we're going to look as an organization at how we best do some of this work. So it's not about we know it and we're going to throw it out to you. We may have expertise on certain aspects, but they have expertise too. How do we as an organization? So the ability to use the data to create the intelligent automation, and also, and I'm going to keep coming back to changing the mindset over what this is. We're not taking what we do and just extending it out. We are looking at how we deliver service and at an enterprise level. And then that will factor into some of these things. So if I was looking at technology, it would be that aspect of automation. And if I was looking at it from another capability, it really would be the human side of it, the perspective shift.
Yeah, and not to take a risky political point here, but it reminds me of I guess it's I don't know, it's communism or socialism. From each according to their abilities, to each according to their needs. And if you strip out the the controversial political aspect of that, that's really what we're talking about. Figure out what you do well. Figure out what you need from your other from your colleagues and other departments, and then work together to optimize how you're doing, how the workflows are working, how the service management practices are put in place, by understanding what it is that each of you do and what each of you need from each other. We're going to give Ken the close before our Q&A. We do have some good questions coming in. Ken, what are some of the, without obviously telling us too much, then you'd have to kill us, but what are some of the cool service management features that Freshworks will be bringing to market over the next 6-12 months?
Well, so the thing I would say that I'm actually pretty excited about is Freshworks for business teams. And this is really the embodiment of being able to pull out the key service management principles and the mechanisms for being able to enable those and make them available to everybody inside of the organization. As kind of like we're basically releasing features on a monthly basis, and in some cases, depending upon the product, actually we're seeing even between bi-weekly. There's a pretty good clip in terms of the ability to introduce things. We're doing 2 major releases a year where we kind of roll up all the detail and make that available, but we're continually providing new capability and making that available to customers because of our nature being a SaaS product. So I'm actually pretty excited about that and believe that people are going to get really good use and utility out of the business teams component.
Yeah, no, that sounds very timely in terms of from what we see, from where most organizations stand today in approaching ESM and the help that they need from the tools that you guys are providing. So we're gonna move on to Q&A, and this is one of those questions, and I think we've talked around it and to it to some degree, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it. Matthew Barron says, "What department should own ESM?" I'm going to start with you, Roy.
None of the above.
No?
Yeah, ESM should start from the board down. If you don't have an organizational view that says, here's how we're going to do this, and I say the same thing about digital transformation, and ESM can be viewed as part of transformation or a step toward transformation, it's got to have commitment from above. Now, that's not to say that the original impetus can't come from someplace like IT, and can say, hey, guys on the board, we have these capabilities now. What do you think we can do about it across the organization? But if you don't have that organizational viewpoint and the organizational power to get things done, you're not going to be very successful. So I think no department is responsible, but all departments are responsible. And I don't mean that to be a non-answer answer, Matt. It really is an answer, but everybody's responsible, and that does not mean nobody's responsible. It means everybody's responsible.
Right. I think maybe, it's not a department who should own ESM. Somebody has to own it, but that's got to be a team. It's got to have, as you said, senior leadership support, champions across the organization, and that goes back to our discussion earlier about collaboration and communication, because without that, you're not going to have the sort of juice that's going to be required. These are not simple transformations. These are business critical. They're strategic. And if IT, well, I think it also points out that IT needs to be at that table, having input to that conversation, but probably shouldn't be driving the process altogether. Valence, what do you think? We're going to throw it to you anyway. Who should own ESM? And it's the non-answer that we're looking for.
I fall into the same non-answer category to the same extent that because commitment at the leadership level is so critical to being able to move it, not buy-in, not the lip service, but actual tangible commitment to it. I'm going to free resources. We're going to collaborate together to do this. I'm going to make time for it. If we don't do those things, you struggle on the commitment. It doesn't matter if we want to do it, if we're not going to change our ways of working, if we're not going to meet in the middle on certain things, because I want to work this way, we work that way. To find the way you're going to work, everyone has to give something. It's what we see with all the frameworks too. I'm agile, I'm this, I'm that. Yeah, but I want to be agile with no service management. I want to be service management with no agile. I want, everyone wants theirs to be preeminent. To move into this requires us to look at things together. Ken, you were mentioning so much earlier about just sort of that whole aspect of bringing some of those elements in. I'm trying to remember exactly what you said, but the whole idea is I can't look at these separately. I've got to look at how do I do this as an organization? And that really comes from that top level commitment, because it's going to look different for different people. And expertise is going to vary throughout the organization and what I can leverage. So if we're not willing to work together, we're going to struggle on getting it done, even if we decide it's something that needs doing.
Right. And Cam, I'm going to shift this a little bit. It's kind of staying on the same track, but what that implies to me is, from your perspective as a solution provider, you're selling to a different set of people, perhaps than earlier on, right? So it's moving beyond an IT sale. What has that been like for your team? I mean, what are some of the experiences you're having in terms of how do you get to the people outside of IT, and how do you have those conversations?
Well, so I think both the answer to the previous question and the answer to your question are really the same answer. Because at the end of the day, the thing that people are really focused on is, hey, I need to be able to do something. There's something I want to be able to get in terms of an outcome, or something I need help in producing. So to the extent that we, from Valence and Roy's comments about, you got to have the upper level support because it's going to take funding. It's going to take, resources in order to be able to make this all work. There's two things I would suggest. First is that any business unit that wants to engage in this, they actually become responsible for what they build. In the past, we've actually used this thing called shadow IT, right? Well, shadow IT is really not a problem, because if somebody has the ability to fund something and is getting the right results, perfect, 2 thumbs up, we love it, because they're now being able to produce what they need to produce. Where shadow IT really became a problem is if somebody goes off and purchases something and then it doesn't work, and then you come yell at IT because it doesn't work. Well, okay, that's where it actually is a problem. So if you're being responsible for owning it and producing good results, then great. We have no problem there. The second portion of this, though, I think is really where some of the nuance comes in. And some of the customers I've worked with has been about creating a community of practice. So we can actually have one authoritative source for being able to understand how we want ESM to be propagated throughout the organization, which means that we can actually collect best practices, we can collect methods, we can cultivate and curate that knowledge and provide coaching to the individual teams that are going to take on doing ESM, which does not mean that, there is a right way and a wrong way of doing it, but rather something that's actually fit for purpose. And every team that engages in this, we can actually collect their lessons learned along the way, think critically about their results, and now be able to tweak and tune that. So it really is an expression of how we want to manage technology and access to these things inside of our organization. definitely not a one size fits all.
If I can just sort of add to that as well. I was just going to say, and that sort of brings it back into both spaces again, which is somewhere our organization has to decide this is how we want to do things.
Yeah.
If not, everyone spins out and does their own thing. And there's risk associated to that, not just if I did it or if it failed, but multiple solutions with multiple different approaches introduces risk and uncertainty into the environment that can cause cascading problems throughout an organization. So you have to understand the risk profile and the tolerance you have so that you understand whether that's a viable risk, whether it's business-led or shadow, whatever we want to call it, IT versus IT within the IT department. There is a risk element to spinning up things in isolation. So you have to consider that from the viability of service, as well as the risk to the viability of service over time.
Yeah, that's great. So I apologize. I'm in an interesting situation. Apparently still, you can hear me, and I guess you can see me, but my On24 screen is a big black square at this point. So I'm going to pretend that I can actually see what's going on. One of the questions, and I think it's an interesting one, given all the conversations that I've had in recent months around ITOL and do we need a change management board, et cetera? And the question was, do we need an ESM board? I'm going to start with you again, Roy.
No, I don't think so. I think that what I meant before when I said about just coming from the board, I mean the board of directors. I mean the organizational board of directors. Problems happen when executives will say things like, well, you take care of that. As soon as you delegate in that way, you're giving up the responsibility. And we were talking about how it's everybody's responsibility. As soon as you say that, now it becomes their problem. Then what you're doing really is chickening out. You're removing yourself from the possibility of failure. When you're committed to something, it's the old story of the chicken and the pig in the breakfast, right? The chicken is involved, the pig is committed, where there's eggs and bacon. And the board has to have that kind of commitment. Your senior management, your most senior people have to do that. Now, does that mean that there's not a group of people across the organization who become very much involved and kind of take leadership roles to get things to happen? Absolutely, that happens, but it doesn't mean that one person is responsible or that one department is responsible.
Great, and I seem to be back. I apologize for that. That was a very interesting little interlude there.
You look just like the guy that was here before, Tim.
Just a little more frazzled. So a question here from Alicia Perugini. How do you get people who do not understand the concept of start where you are when they are so focused on not hurting somebody's feelings because that's the way it's always been done? How do you get them on board with this concept? Valence, what do you think on that?
Part of it is I think we don't explain it well, and that marketing aspect of here's what we're trying to accomplish. I don't know that I've never found start where you are to be a hard one, because where else can you start, honestly? There's only one spot to start. I think helping people understand what you're trying to achieve and understanding the culture and the behaviors and what drove it, because a lot of times you need to understand why someone thinks a certain way, and it's hard to get there. But if I know their resistance because we've tried it 14 times and it's failed, I'm going to approach that differently than I just like the way I work. So if I understand where it comes from, I can tailor how I approach it differently. Quick wins are always going to help, but you have to understand where it comes from in order to craft a proper message and communicate in a more effective way. It's not going to be the same for everyone, for every role, or for every purpose.
Great. Ken or Roy, do you have anything to add on to that?
Yes, definitely. So one of the things I think about start where you are as an antidote. And the antidote is associated with a hazardous attitude. And the hazardous attitude is, I must know everything about everything before I can get started. Now, face it, from a technology standpoint, lots of us have a lot of years in this, and we prided ourselves on knowing speeds and feeds and protocols and technologies and all sorts of things where there's a lot of detailed stuff to understand and kind of put together. But in the case of start where you are, I think that the essence of it, especially as it relates to ESM, is You just got to start having conversations. Not willy-nilly conversations, but like a conversation where you can come to understand, come to a new realization. And that requires people to go into a very fuzzy and unfamiliar state, one where there's the sense of certainty might be missing. But that's really kind of the the benefit to it, because there's like the Lewis and Clark thing of being an explorer, going deep into new territory. And there's lots to learn there. And if we take it from the perspective of being able and open to learning new things and coming to a new awareness, I think that's the thing that actually can transform it from being, oh my gosh, all the things I don't know, to, hey, it's pretty exciting. New things to learn.
Yeah, and exciting for folks who are not necessarily tech focused. It's really exciting about how do we change the way we do business and serve our customers. And what can be more important or exciting than that in work? Roy, do you want to address any more on that, or should we move on to another question?
As we're talking about this, I think there's an added benefit that we tend to overlook a lot of times, and not only in talking about ESM, but a lot of the things that we do in relation to business and organizations in general. We tend to forget beginner's mind, right? The Zen thing, having that completely blank slate, like I don't know anything about this. And so as long as you walk into an organization, if you've got that blank slate, but you have an openness to listen to what people are telling you, one of the things that we do as advisors, as consultants, is go into an organization and say, show me what you do.
Yeah.
And walk through it with them and just be open. Don't make any judgments. Just say, and a lot of the times you're going to learn things from the way that things get done. A lot of times you're going to be doing doggy twisty head because you can't figure out quite what they're doing that way or why, but that's okay. And so if you do that, start where you are and have that beginner's mind, you're going to learn and you're going to convey knowledge as well.
Yeah. I would just add to that. There's uncertainty, which people have to get used to because it's always going to be there, as Ken was mentioning. And the other thing, to support Roy's point, you also need an organization that is open to learning and doesn't blame people for things. Psychological safety opens up a lot of this. If I'm going to get in trouble, if this doesn't work this certain way, I'm going to be a lot more resistant to it. I'm a lot more open to it if my company and organization is open to it as a general factor.
Yeah, that again highlights the importance of leadership at a pretty senior level, so that everybody can feel safe and comfortable in pursuing something that, let's face it, is open-ended and uncertain. Roy, this goes back to a question or to a comment you made earlier, and I think it's a good question. How do we avoid giving the impression that IT is telling me how to do my job, and I don't work for IT? Why are they telling me this? How do you advise folks to approach that?
Yeah, I think, and I wrote a series for HDI a couple of years back. It was about the 5 things you're not doing with regard to enterprise service management. And one of them was, make sure it's not about you. Enterprise service management is not about how smart IT is. Absolutely start from that premise and understand that it's not that. It should definitely not be about IT telling other units of business how to do their jobs. IT has to go learn, as I was just saying. Go in with the beginner's mind and say, well, how does payroll do this? And look at ways that processes can be trimmed. Look at ways that automation can be applied. Look at ways to streamline the operations of the organization, and work with people to advise them, but don't tell them how to do it, because once you do that, you're going to start having walls thrown up against you. It's not to say that service management tool has to do every single thing better, but overall what you're trying to do is improve the way that business units contribute to the way the organization operates.
So I'm curious, Valence, as you're going in and working with clients, do you hit that wall a lot? Do you hit that resistance, and how do you approach it?
Yeah, we definitely hit a lot of that resistance, and for much the same reason, which is we always tend to come in as the experts and show us what you do, we'll make it better, instead of let's look at how we do things. One thing I always say that helps is Sometimes I open our processes up to them. Are there things that they can show us? That they have expertise in workflows as well. Are there flaws in ours that we don't see that they see? If it's collaborative, they're looking for optimization for us, we're looking for them, then it really is a partnership. We're not saying ours is perfect, we're going to help you with yours. We're saying we are going to look together at how we optimize work in any area. So in a lot of cases, we act like our stuff can't shift. We know it all, and then we're going to go and approach and help you. Everybody's open to it. How often do we go in and say, look at someone's process and go, that's a really neat idea. I mean, I'll apply that to my stuff. You almost never hear that type of feedback. We always go in expecting that we're going to change what they do. We never talk that we're going to leverage it, and maybe we'll see something through fresh eyes. That beginner's mind is a really big thing, but it has to apply to our own work and how we leverage other teams for it. So I find incorporating them into what we do as well takes that, it's us forcing it out and lets them understand it's a collaborative effort.
So Ken, I'm curious, is that part of, is that part of the educational aspect of what you need to bring when you go in and talk to, especially I would suppose, to a new client?
I believe it is. And there's two questions I want to be able to start off with to make sure it's not focused on I, me, but rather has the us, we centricity to it. And that is, what do you believe you need? How can we help? If you start from there, everything else will sort itself out. As soon as I turn it into, well, you must do it like this. We're not an enforcement arm. We're a collaborator.
Yeah, that's great. And so we have another question, which I think is interesting, because there's actually two questions that seem to me to be very closely related. Leon Como asks, can an ITSM success story in one unit be scaled across the organization? And the other question is, what are some of the key steps that should not be missed when moving service management across the organization? I think those are interesting questions. I'm going to ask you, Ken, to start off on this one, if you would. Can you scale this? Yeah.
So I think it can serve as an example of something that's been successful. The thing I would be very cautious about is positioning it as, so when we say ITSM, it brings up all sorts of notions about all the process and all of the other things that get associated with it. When at the end of the day, you may not necessarily need all of those things in order to be able to deliver successfully against what the ESM outcome or objective is. So as long as we're trying to find what the right mix of all of these skills and competencies are in order to be able to meet that business need, then yeah, we can actually show that we've had an experience of using this in an area, as in service management applied to the challenges of IT, as opposed to, well, it's about IT and ITSM. So making that pivot is pretty important to help get it right-sized.
And I think that goes back to the marketing comment at the very beginning of this conversation, right? So that's a huge tool. If you do have some success in a given department or business function, make sure that you're out there, shouting it from the rooftops, right?
Absolutely.
Valence, what do you see in terms of, how do you take early success, and scale that across the organization?
In the idea of, one, understand the context of the success. This is what it was for which purpose, because then I can see where it's applicable. And also, and sometimes it's an element of understand where not to apply it. The level of complexity of certain things doesn't allow for as much of that borrowing of or extension of a particular approach as others. So the more complex, the more variable things are, the harder it is to simply scale something. You're beyond the expertise, you're into adjustment. If you're a Cunnivan guy, you're into experiment and adjust. The less standardized the work, the harder it is to simply extend an approach. But you just want to know where it applies. Does it apply to a whole bunch of areas? Then you can look at it. Does it need variation? Can we just extend as is? So I think there's an investigation aspect that comes in first. Applicability. I think Ken was right in that it's a good example of, we applied these practices in this way here, and it bore these really good results. We can apply them here in a similar way and provide those types of results against a very similar challenge. And then we can say, if this is a good fit, we can port it. If this is another fit, we can adapt it. And if it's something that's a little bit different, we're going to look at it an entirely different way.
Yeah, and because the operation is so different across the different departments, you can simply say, hey, look, we applied this to business critical function or process or whatever in our organization. We're not saying you have the same process or need, but this is a tool. It's worth exploring how you might use it. Roy, do you want to take a stab at this one?
Yeah, I think that one of the ways that we can see things a little more clearly is to look at them as being analogous, right? So we tend to think that there's linear connections or that things have to be the same. Not necessarily. If you can think about analogies of incident management to running a supermarket, clean up an aisle 5 is an incident. If you can train yourself to think in analogies, you can see, okay, we've had success in this particular department with these particular sets of functions or processes. Now, let's see if there's anything that looks and smells like that over here. And I think Balance was talking about that before. If you can find something similar, although not necessarily the same, don't be afraid to take the lessons from one area and apply them to something else. Don't force the form on it, but try to see the function as an abstract of that and say, okay, well, what you want to get is this data from point A to point B and have this, and this happen to it. Then there's probably a way to get that done. So just abstract the results from all the parts and pieces that went into it.
Great, I appreciate that. Audience, any more questions? We do have a few more minutes, so if you guys have anything else that we can help you think about, this would be the time to type those into the Q&A box and hit submit. I'll give you about 30 seconds to do that, and then we're going to assume that you've all gone shy.
Can I sing the Jeopardy theme? No.
All righty, we have given them everything they need to know, guys. This is a huge success for us. I appreciate it. So that is all the time we have for today, and I'm going to thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us and for putting in some great questions. It really helps us to add value as we're doing this. A huge thank you to Roy, to Balance, and to Ken. Thanks again to Freshworks for sponsoring the session today. As a reminder to the audience, you will receive a follow-up email that's going to include a link to view a recording of today's session. So if you found this event useful, please share that on-demand link with your colleagues. Once you leave the event, a short survey is going to pop up on your screen. We'd appreciate it very much if you would go ahead and share your feedback on this webinar. It really helps us to make sure that we're providing the value that you expect from us and to tailor our programs to your interests. So that's it. Stay safe, everybody, and have a great day.